live. Let me get this refreshed. All right. Welcome everyone back to the Anglican Acolyte. Here with my guest, Reverend Christian Dove. He is one of our priests of the UECNA. And this is a little video that I wanted to do with him to just explain what the UECNA is, what we're all about, and just, in a way, just give a sales pitch of here's who we are, here's why we exist, here's why we do things, run things, and why you, if you are looking into Anglicanism, should join the UECNA. Father Christian, do you want to just give a little introduction about yourself?
Sure. So, let's see where to begin. I grew up very simply. I'm going to get the quick story. I grew up as a generic dispensational American evangelical, and then went through the gauntlet from college onward, going down the path of historical and theological literacy that ended up with me flushing into the Anglican tradition. So right about the time I was contemplating, or rather I was being called to be a minister, I just so happened to be in the process of making that commitment to the Anglican way as well. And so I was ordained ultimately in 2021, and as a deacon, 2022 as a priest. And I've been serving my entire ministerial career here in Central Florida in Lake County, the Leesburg Villages area. And so we just started up our first local parish, rather in our specific area. We have one other parish that's in our jurisdiction here in Wildwood, Grace Anglican Church. But I went to found with my parishioners the Absolution Church parish, which is in Leesburg, Florida, in October of last year. So my passion and expertise is historical theology, history broadly, Western history, but as well beyond that. And I'm very passionate about catechesis. I'm passionate about formation, the development of new ministers. So for those who follow me on X, they know a big thing I'm into is trying to recruit. I'm very interested in helping to counsel and give guidance to young men, and not all of them young, who are interested in pursuing holy orders or who feel call, who have had the Spirit speaking in their life through others in the church and have given them a unique gifting and a passion for the church. So those are kind of my areas of interest. And I've been in the UEC. I was ordained under Archbishop Peter Robinson, and I've been in the UEC my entire ministerial career, and I'm pretty fond of it, actually. And so, yes, I'm a very unapologetic advocate for the UEC, and not just where it has been and where it is right now, but where I see it going. So as you know, Zach, we are part of a group of people who have a vision for the future of this jurisdiction and the future of Protestant Anglicanism in this country. So and beyond. And so I guess that's the introduction. Also, forgive me, my voice is not what it normally is. I'm recovering from a bout of bronchitis, and so I might get a tickle in my throat from time to time, and I'm a little bit raspy. So bear with me.
Perfect. So let's say somebody was to either be in the ACNA or is looking into Anglicanism and whatnot, and they say, you guys seem really interesting. You have a lot of things that are really appealing, or maybe it seems to be of interest, but what sets us apart from somebody like the ACNA or the REC or the ACC or someone like that? Like why, what sets us apart? Sets us apart first. We'll go there first.
I think there's a few things. The first is that we are unapologetically confessionally Protestant. That's pretty ubiquitous. There are a few, maybe, there might be a small handful of parishes and ministers who are maybe in the middle ground of that. They wouldn't necessarily be anti-Protestant, but they're not necessarily identifying as Protestant. But the majority of our clergy and parishes at this point, I think, generally represent a confessional Anglican Protestantism. And certainly all the new ordinands that we're having coming in, all the current guys in training who are being ordained or will be ordained shortly, are all confessional Protestants. And so the first thing that really, I think, sets us apart is that in terms of doctrinal commitment, we're pretty uniform. There's uniform within a reasonable range. And so I'd say that range kind of encompasses moderate Lutheranism to moderate Continental Reformed, and in terms of its breadth. And so we have guys who've been in the Lutheran Church who've come over and been ordained as priests with us. We have guys who are Dutch Reformed. We've had guys who were Presbyterian. And so we've had a whole bunch of people from all the scopes of, you could say, the spectrum of Protestant orthodoxy, and by that I mean 16th century Protestantism, who've come in and been very made a good home for themselves here. So we're confessionally Protestant, and that is not just by accident, but it is the direction we want to keep going. And to be fair, that really played a role in the UEC breaking away from the ACNA, or the original ACNA, back in the 70s, late 70s, which was now the ACC. So we're Protestant. We are. Another thing that sets us apart is that we have a. I mean, I guess I kind of consolidated a lot of my points into that statement earlier, but we have a lot of young ministers coming in. So I suppose that we have a lot of youthful energy that's been injected of late and is continuing to build. So we're going to have, not that we don't have our seasoned ministers, and we love and cherish them, and we're grateful for them, but we do have, contra the way Anglicanism has kind of been going in this country over the last few years, we have a noticeable expansion in fresh ministers coming in their 20s and 30s. And so that's, I think it's a boon. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And we also have, what you're not going to find is a lot of, well, okay, and we're not, we don't ordain women, and we're never going to. So for those who have a conviction on this matter and who are trying to find a jurisdiction which is ubiquitous in this matter, we are strongly for the apostolic tradition of male-only ordination, and we maintain that as both a, not just as a tradition, but as a biblical mandate. So we have that as well. And I mean, so what you're going to get is a commitment to of apostolic ordination. You're going to get a commitment to growth and development of the church, missions, developing new parishes. You're going to get a robust Protestant confessionalism, and you're not going to bump into too much. There's a limit to the amount of that diversity that we see in Anglicanism broadly in our jurisdiction. We're a broad church in the sense that we're accommodating, but in terms of our actual, our commitments, those are very Protestant and very confessional, and that's who we are. But there's we understand there's a reasonable scope of tolerance within that Protestant orthodoxy that we're very happy to accommodate. So,
yeah, yeah, something I just found unique coming in from the Church of Christ world is just the as you were saying, unapologetic, just stronghold of, Anglican churches, and I'm not shaming them entirely on this, but it's like they had their ups and downs, their gives and takes when it comes to theology, but it's like the UECNA from the start strongly said this is what we believe. And while other groups have either lost their way or kind of in this weird confusing state in some of the denominations, it seems to have just stayed just with the test of time since the 70s, and that's what really brought me closer to the UECNA, because it's like I want to be firmly Anglican, but it's like I also want to know firmly what I believe, and for it to just stay consistent from when it came about. To see, like I said, to see the UECNA like this is something that was really appealing to me coming in, and now being in seminary and like learning the ways kind of behind the scenes and everything. It's like, yeah, this is something that is going to continually stay consistent, especially with, as you were saying, the young guys coming in wanting a stronghold, to borrow biblically, a rock to stand on, and not know within the next 5 years, oh, suddenly we're inviting things in that we were promised that aren't going to come in, or jumping into something thinking it is one thing, but it's actually not that. Now it's a whole confusion. Then they start jumping ship and things like that. So that to me is something I found really appealing as well. Tell us what a UECNA church service is like. So how would you go about with your church?
Okay, well, the UEC is going to be, there's going to be some diversity in liturgics, within again a realm of reasonable, deviation. We're very big on maintaining the rubrics of the prayer books. So the official prayer books of the UEC are the 1928 American and the 1662, original English version. And so, the rule of it is this: you follow the rubrics. That's our Archbishop's, clarion call is you follow the rubrics. You don't deviate from the rubrics. Now, within the realm of what the rubrics cover, obviously they only cover so much, and so there's still a place for some execution of, say, manual acts and other traditional aspects that a given parish might have over another. There's a certain realm of you can beautify or enhance the service according to the guardrails, and so, but the guardrails are the rubrics, and so we do maintain those very thoroughly, and that's going to ideally be universal throughout our parishes, or at least that's the hope and idea. We, at my church specifically, you're going to get, I suppose broadly, we kind of fall into the old high church tradition. So you have we have a reasonable amount of ceremonial, but it's tempered to the environs of the parish in which it's being done. Obviously, you're not going to conduct a cathedral style service in a rural parish set, church house. That's just not aesthetically congruent most of the time. So that is also one of our Archbishop's focus, is to say, we make the service appropriate to the place in which it is occurring. And he always goes back to the historic differentiation between cathedral and local parish worship in the history of the English church. So in my church, it's a relatively small congregation. We have about 20 people on average every Sunday right now. We only started about 8 months ago. So we're approaching our first year, but we're still a relatively small group. So, and we're also renting a space that's effectively it used to be a chapel that was converted into something of a youth building. So it's a little bit less, even compared to what probably it looked like once upon a time. It's not the most ecclesiastically enhanced space, although we're very grateful for it. And so, there's a limit to what I can do in that environment with what I have. But what you're going to get is the full prayer book communion service on Sunday. You're going to get communion every Sunday. You're going to get some degree of, even though we may follow the lectionary, although I deviate from that and I do exegetical series from time to time, either way, you're going to get some level of thorough Christocentric preaching. And, our homilies, for example, will run anywhere from 20 to 35 minutes, typically, depending upon the day. Our service typically hovers around an hour and a half. Sometimes we get out early. Sometimes it ends in an hour and 15 to 20 minutes. We like to keep the kids integrated. Now, this is so a lot of these things are going to vary from parish to parish, because there isn't a uniform set of regulations of this is how you run your Sunday morning worship. And also, it's not currently ideal for where I'm at right now, because as we expand, I have hopes to do more services. I'd like to start Sunday morning with an earlier morning prayer service, then perhaps a Bible study time followed by the morning Holy Communion service or something like that. But obviously we need people and commitment to make those things happen. We just don't have the manpower right now. But you're going to get, with the kids in our case, we do have the kids integrated in the service at least 1 week of the month. We are doing a joint partly is because right now we're trying out a joint children's church program with our hosting church, who has been very kind to us, and it kind of allows us to help them and them to help us concurrently. And so, but we'll see if that's going to be something we do long term. We're still considering whether it's going to be a long term thing we do, because we're coming to the conclusion we think the children are. Most of us are of the mind that it's best to keep the kids in the service altogether. So either way, we're a family church. We have lots of kids. We keep the kids in the service, and generally the kids do very well. But we're very obviously patient with that because we have lots of young families. So, you're going to get a very family-focused service. You're going to get a very reverent service. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things I'm going to say here that is just, this is generic to Anglicanism, not specific to, the UEC or even to my parish. But, a focus on beauty as best as we can make it, and reverence and holiness, and family continuous worship. And also outside of that, we have a time in our service that we dedicate to some level of catechism, and so that helps the parents and the kids as they develop their own, because we have a lot of people in their 30s and early 40s who maybe they grew up in church but never really caught with them, and then they're coming back in their 30s and 40s as they're having families and kids, and they're playing catch up too. So it kind of works out that we're able to focus on catechism both for the benefit of the parents and the kids. So those are some things you're going to find in our parish. But we're pretty big on maintaining at least some standard degree of vestments. And for example, a cassock surplice and tippet or stole. Stole in the case of the Holy Communion. And for those who are going with a little bit more higher ceremonial, it's not uncommon to find a cope or even a chasuble. We're not really neurotic about which vestments people choose to use as much as what they mean when they use them, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So it's we're not really against using specific vestments as long as they're in good order and they aren't representing explicitly some theological deviation from our Protestant heritage.
Nice. Let's see. So what would be a struggle somebody would have, like if they were going into the UECNA, they walk into a church, it's like something that potentially would make them go, I don't know about this, or this is foreign to me, even as an Anglican, like something to that extent. Like, what would be a difficulty somebody would have walking into the UECNA? I know that's kind of a weird question, but
I think the biggest difficulty is that our parishes are pretty small right now, because a lot of the ones that we have are missions. We have a lot of missional parishes going on right now. The UEC's history, excuse me, the UEC's history has had kind of ups and downs. And it had a bit of a down. There was a bit of a tumultuous period, and I'm not an expert on the matter. I'm just kind of piecing together what I know from what I've seen and what I've read and what I've heard. But it seems like over the last 15, 20 years, the church has kind of gone through a bit of some upheavals and some people, groups coming and leaving, and it's kind of stuff that all jurisdictions can go through seasons like this. And so what we've had is that we have a lot of parishes at this point that are relatively smaller, that are either being replanted or they're fresh plants. And so what you're going to largely bump into across the board is that a lot of our parishes are small. And so for some people, when they go into a church and they find only 20 people, sometimes less in some parishes that are also newer or have a more, I guess you could say, age-restricted demographic that they're serving, you might be a little bit taken aback by the smallness of it. And for a lot of people growing up in bigger churches, hundreds of people, big production value, you're going to bump into some stuff that's like, well, this is very small and so on the one hand, it could go well. It could be, well, this is intimate, and for people who have done in-home Bible studies with worship services, or maybe did like a house church thing once upon a time, that might be reminiscent of like, well, we have the environs, we have the aesthetics, we have the sense of that this is an actual church, but it feels small and kind of intimate as a house church would, and some people like that, some people don't. And also some people have a hard time viewing beyond the here and now. So they'll bump into a church, they see, well, it looks really tiny now, and it's kind of it's a bit of a catch-22 for those who are in the church, because it's like, well, we could grow if all the people who come and say it's too small would stick around for a few weeks, because then we would gain more traction. So the challenge is getting people to come in and say, well, it's small now, but we see where this is going, and committing to that, and being willing to build something for the future. And in a culture where we are so obsessed with immediate gratification, for a lot of people, that's a challenge. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is that, yeah, you're going to generally bump into small parishes that there aren't many of we have maybe 2 or 3 that are more robust, but we don't have many that are particularly big, and most of them are small at this time. So, and again, that's a attribution to the fact that we have a lot of, for example, recently ordained young men who are planting churches from scratch, and there's incumbent, myself included, there's incumbent challenges that come with that. And if you're going to church, if your desire is to go to church to worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness according to the apostolic and Protestant tradition, and you are seeking to stand fast against the currents of our culture and the direction they're going, and develop meaningful relationships with people that go beyond the superficial greetings on Sunday morning, well, then you probably will find a good home in a UEC church. But it's one of those things where you have to be willing to put out to get back, as opposed to going to church just to consume. If you're going to church just with a consumeristic mindset, you're looking just to get some sort of if your focus is your own personal gratification, rather than the worship of the God of the universe and paying homage to him and building his church where it needs to be built, it may not be a good fit. But thankfully, there's a lot of people, more and more every day, who seem to be more of the mind of the former. So that's an encouragement. And I've had a lot of people come through my door. We started with 12 people. Now we have an attendance of around 20, but we have about 24 people in our congregation, 24, 25. So we've had pretty decent percent growth in the short time we've been operating, even though we're still relatively small. And we're also, another interesting thing for where we're at with Absolution Church here in Lake County, is that Leesburg, Florida, and Wildwood, Florida, which are adjacent to one another, are the two fastest growing cities in the country right now, at least as of recent news reports in the past few months. And that's largely attributable probably to the villages, but we have a lot of people coming here all the time, a lot of development happening. For us, that's encouraging, because we know as the population expands, as people come in from other places, they're going to be looking for a church, and we're hoping we can be that church for them.
So what would you say, or what's something that you would advertise as like a positive for a lot of the young guys coming in and planning churches and whatnot? Like what are the benefits of us doing that, other than growing and whatnot?
The strongest benefit is that you're not going to be beholden to I want to be careful how I say this. I have a propensity to trigger the elders, even though I love them dearly. They assume that every time I say something remotely critical, it's an attack, and it's not. You will not be beholden to a calcified, decaying architecture, if I can put institutional architecture, coming into the UEC like you might find in other places. Because of the smallness of our jurisdiction, because of the emphasis on growth and recruitment and development, there's just not a lot of bureaucratic hierarchy you have to navigate. There's not a lot of excessive rules and regulations. It's rather hands-on. It's decentralized. That's, I guess, the way I would put it. It is decentralized, and it is breathing. And those are two which has its double sword. But for where we're at right now, and I think for young men who wish to serve the church with their lives, I think this is actually a strong benefit that we have, because in my experience, both personally and working with many other young men, I know that is, wherever you work, whatever industry you're in, whatever institution you're in, that tends to be one of the greatest sources of morale drain and frustration, and the sense of mundanity and futility that comes with, working any typical job, is having to navigate the sort of the bureaucratic bloat that seems to find its way into most institutions today, and the hoops you have to jump through, the things you have to navigate, the minefields you have to step through to get anything done. And so the benefit of the UEC is that we really don't have that. You have a lot of freedom. You have a lot of liberty. You have a lot of, you have leadership that's largely hands off and says, look, as long as you're not doing something against the rules, and the rules are very clear, the rules are very, they're not ambiguous, and they're concise. And these are the rules, these are the guardrails. And if you follow within the guardrails, you're fine. And you have the liberty to operate in your own executive decision-making and these things. And we're not going to over manage you. And so now, on the other hand, some people like to be managed more, and that's fine. And you can, I know Bishop Peter always takes my calls and my messages if I ever need input from him. I do seek it for a second opinion, if nothing else, a lot. But he's been pretty responsive in my history on giving input there. And of course, there's other older, more experienced ministers who are also very enthusiastic to share their experience and their opinions. And so you have that there when you need it or want it, but it's not forced upon you. And I think that's the big positive difference. Mm-hmm. So that's the benefit of it, but it is a double-edged sword. And I'll just say the other side of it is that if you're not a self-starter, if you're not a lifelong learner, if you're not someone who's constantly willing to grow and learn new things and develop new talents and learn, for example, if you've never opened up a business before, you want to be a church planner, well, you better learn how to open up, take care of that infrastructural necessities. You need to learn how to set up a nonprofit corporation. You need to know how to set up all the things you need to be able to get that thing off the ground. And hopefully you have other people, of course, who are going to be part of your congregation to help you, but you're kind of on your own. And so you have to, because it's hands off, because you're not being micromanaged, you're also expected to basically do your own work. And so you're not going to have this administrative apparatus that's kind of doing everything for you. You're going to have to do it yourself. And so that can be, for some people, a downside, but the upside is you get to set things up the way that you are convicted they're done best, along with your people, your stakeholders, your friends and family, the people who are in your parish who are working with you as according to them agreeing with you. You get to do it as a group according to your best convictions on the matter, rather than having to follow an overly standardized approach. So those are some of the main. I think it's a net positive, but it's not going to be for everybody, and I understand that. I know that, and I'm very transparent. Every time I get a call from a new guy inquiring about the UEC, I do get a lot of them. One of the first things I try to make very clear from the beginning is you're going to have support. I'm here, and other guys are here who are going to be supporting you, morale boosting you, who are going to be around to help you with things or give you that advice and information as you need it. But you are going to have to be self-directed and get things done on your own. And so as long as you're okay with that, this could be a very good fit. But if you're not, maybe you want to go through the meat grinder somewhere else.
Yeah. That's the joy about the UECNA as well. Like you're saying, you have a structured liberty, I guess that'd be a word to say, where it's
a constitutional liberty, if you will. Yes.
Here's the bars you don't cross, but anything in between these bars, it's to your heart's content, so long as it's biblical and as you're saying,
as long as it's done in good order. Good order and common sense, as Bishop Peter says. If you could just apply common sense, that would be great.
Yeah, that's the one benefit of our Archbishop as well. He's not just British, he's British. So when he talks, he has a very posh British accent. really just hypnotized into here.
Yeah, he was very much raised providentially for the role in which he currently finds himself. So that is to be sure.
Yeah, and just as you're saying at the very end, just having a tight-knit community just with the clergy as well is something that even right now, me not ordained yet, just seeing that and already benefiting from it, like even if it's like just a message, or if it's us just hanging out and just calling and all talking together, just being of one community, like even just playing games together or stuff like that, or talking theology. It's just it's not this feeling like, even though I personally just sometimes enter into a call with a bunch of you guys and still feel like, oh, I'm way out of my element. These guys are like on higher white pillars than I'll ever be, type of deal. It's just like knowing that really isn't the case. It's like you guys see each other as humans, not like I'm the high and mighty priest with all the pretty colors and smells and bells, and you know, how dare a layman peasant come and like approach me with their, like, I don't know, peasantry. Like, it's
no, on the contrary, my friend, it's because I'm so high and mighty and I have the smells and the bells, I have the noblesse oblige that I have to take care of you. You see, that's the way it works. That's the way it works.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
No,
but yeah, it's just like just having that just human connection of, I don't have to be afraid of my priest, because yes, he has the titles and obviously he has the reverence that he deserves, but at the same time, he's also just a guy. And I think that like stands out as well, because like, you know, you and I, like, we're both like, we're just long haired dudes, beards, and I've seen a couple of your Facebook profile pictures with like Hawaiian t-shirts on. It's just like that. It's like you don't expect that, but it's there and it's cool. It's unique.
Yeah, we're all human. I mean, that's the thing. You know, getting the juju doesn't make you any less human. It just makes you a human with an office to uphold. You know, it's you know, you don't become any less human when you become a priest than when the president becomes the president of the United States. And then leaves the office eventually. He's still the guy. He's just you know, you're still human. You're just assuming an office. So I think, yeah, one of the benefits in that, with respect to our people and our community, as I will say this, yes, we have a very tight-knit community among up-and-coming clergy and young clergy. We just have a very good, you could almost say fraternal order of guys that are just very involved with each other. And it is nice what you learn is that the more that you interact with other men seeking, in general, like really interacting more beyond a superficial level, but especially for guys who feel a call to the cloth, to the holy orders, to the service of the church, you really find that at the end of the day, we're all kind of the same. You know, we're all quirky in our own ways and have our own, we have distinguishing characteristics, but at the substance of it, we're all kind of the same. It's kind of like marriage, in my experience. Is like the more you learn about other people's marriages and the things they struggle with and what they're going through, and the more you realize every marriage is very, very similar. I won't say exactly the same, but it's very, very similar across the board. And really, that's just humanity in general, I think, but especially it follows through with men called to holy orders. It seems there's a very consistent pattern that, you know, we all struggle with the same things. We all have the same ups and downs. You realize this is just par for the course. We just all have to go through this stuff. And so it's nice when you have a group of guys who can say, yeah, don't get too navel gazy. What just happened to you is very common and very normal. And this is how you best deal with that, because it's going to happen again and again and again and again. And you just have to know this is part of what you signed up for. And so this is how you navigate that. And this is what you can do to prevent that from happening in such a problematic way in the future. Or, you know, sometimes you just need encouragement, because you'll have a day where you're planning a church and, you know, you're there every Sunday morning because you got to be. But lo and behold, one Sunday morning, literally no one shows up, which you would, you know, when you have a congregation of 20 plus people, you're like, okay, it's sometimes you're going to have a lower group, but, you know, everyone to be missing. It's happened. It's happened to me. It's happened to a lot of other people. You just have some Sundays where, for whatever reason, the stars didn't align and nobody shows up. And what do you do then? You want to go cry in your coffee. But that's when you're reminded that, hey, this isn't about you. It's not about, their absence wasn't a function of you, nor is it your responsibility. That was just, it happened. And, but you're not called to do that. You're not called to fix that. You're called to do your job. And so that's where you say, okay, I pick up and I do it again next week and again next week and again next week. And I'm going on. But the point is that these are the sorts of things you bump into in holy orders. And having men in your life who are in the trenches with you, who are willing to say you're not alone and what you're going through is normal and common, makes a huge difference. And I think that's one of the problems, ironically, of seminaries. And I'm going off again, this is anecdotal off of my experience and those of others. But seminary, ironically, you would think it would be the opposite, because you're with so many other people, men, hopefully, who are pursuing holy orders, who are pursuing ordination and becoming pastors. You would think it would kind of knit more guys together in the same way, but it seems to have the opposite impact in my experience, where it seems to atomize people and alienate them from each other. And kind of it does encourage that navel gazing and that keeping up appearances and a lot of other unfortunate things that tend to create very bad social emotional habits that have long-term consequences in the ministry. And you end up paying the piper down the road in a very harsh way more often than not. And so anyway, I think that's one thing where we benefit, is that while we're not this fraternal aspect of the men we have together in this jurisdiction is it has a very healthful effect. It really improves, I think, the quality of life for a lot of guys who are pursuing ministry or who are in ministry, to know they're not alone and that they have an active, direct connection with uncritical, loving. I say uncritical, unharsh. We're critical. We're just very loving in the way we're critical. But you have voices that you can trust and that care for you. And I think that's always the biggest issue, I think, in American Christianity broadly, is we just don't have much pastoring of the pastors these days. And that is, so what do you see? You see a lot of pastoral suicide and burnout and other moral failure and a lot of other things going on. I think a lot of that is attributable to a failure to pastor the pastors. And I think that's something that we're doing pretty good at. By contrast, I think we're doing pretty well with that in the UEC.
Yeah. So kind of keeping on to the theme of fraternity, slightly deviating a little bit, one thing that I found really unique and has garnered an interest from me and some others is the fact that the UECNA, we're so classical and so traditional. We actually have a monastery and a couple of monks. So, do you know any about that? Or
that is beyond. I mean, I know them, of course. We have some lovely guys who have maintained that order for some time, and they have a little farmstead out in Virginia, and it is with a chapel, and it's a lovely little place. I'm very I'm very supportive of what they do, although I'm not an expert on what it looks like and how many their numbers are and so on right now. I am definitely a supporter of kind of a neo-monasticism in a Protestant way in this country. I think it's an answer to a lot of, not a lifelong order, so to speak, for most people, but everyone goes through their rite of passage when they hit, they graduate high school and you're supposed to go to college or maybe trade school or whatever it is. But most people are either funneled. It's like either you go to college or you go get a job working at McDonald's or something. I don't know. That the mentality we have in America kind of needs to shift on this. But the point is that a lot of people go, and what does college do? It actually, for a lot of people, doesn't do well for them. And or for a lot of people, they might be seeking direction and structure in their life, and they never got spiritual formation. I think for a lot of young people, some sort of a monastery program where you can go and just kind of commit yourself for 3 to 5 years and just say, I'm gonna go work and pray in a monastery for a few years while I get my spiritual life ironed out and I have structure, and I have I work for my keep, but I have a structured provision for my life, and I can focus on getting where I need to be personally and spiritually before I kind of shove off into the world on my own completely. I think that would be a really good thing to keep looking to develop. It's actually a vision I have in the long run. I'd like to start something to that effect here in Central Florida, whenever in God's timing it happens. So I do definitely support them with what they're doing. They're lovely men who've done a lot, and but it's not my area of expertise. I'm not the one you want to talk to about commenting on it, because all I can say is they're great. They do great things. They're sweet men. They wear their habits. That they're trying to maintain that historical monastic feel to what they do, and I think it's delightful. But yeah, I'm not an expert on the matter.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, when I found that out, I was like, "Oh man, that's really interesting." The order, like we just have a group called like the Order of Saint Patrick, and it's like, yeah, we have mugs. It's like, man, what a thing to just stumble upon when you're looking into the UECNA. This might be a little bit more kind of in your expertise, because I know you work really careful and work very close with him. Tell us a little bit about our Right Reverend Archbishop Peter Robinson the Great, a saint in the making, as I like to say.
Well, he is a delightful man. I mean, I'm not an expert on his biography, but I have a bit of a knowledge of his history, and I don't think there's anything about it that I've learned that's classified, so I'm happy to share with what I know. He grew up in England, and he's from Yorkshire. He, ironically, I mean, not ironically, just he was actually a postman once upon a time. That was his first career, was as a postman in Yorkshire. And he, I suppose at some point, he grew up in Church of England. He desired a call or he received a call in some capacity to pursue holy orders. And so he did. From what I understand, there was some degree of political tension, friction in his diocese with perhaps his bishop. Of course, this was some time back, but this was also around the time where the shenanigans were really starting to take root in a lot of places at that time, as we know, the way things have gone in our the Episcopal Church over here in the U.S. And so there was some degree of a difficulty in the process of seeking orders in the Church of England. So I believe he was ordained to the priesthood in the Free Church of England, which is basically the REC in England. And then he would later come over to the States. He married a citizen of the U.S., and so he ended up coming over here. He got a job at, I believe, in Arizona. I can't recall if that was his first parish over here in the States or not, but I know he served in Tucson for a bit. And so over time, he ended up in the UEC. I think he came over to, which jurisdiction was he in when he came over? I don't think he was originally in the UEC when he came over from England, but he ended up in the UEC shortly thereafter. And he's been in the UEC ever since, and he was ordained. He was elected to be consecrated bishop, I think, around the ballpark of shortly after 2010, I think, in that ballpark. All this information is on the church, on the UEC website, by the way. I'm just going off the cuff on this, but he was consecrated bishop around 2010, and almost immediately after he became the presiding archbishop, because the current one had, I can't recall if he passed away unexpectedly or if he retired due to health decline, but either way, he's been our archbishop certainly as long as I've been with the UEC. I've been with the UEC since 2018, and so or 2019. So he's been archbishop as long as I've been here, and I think he's doing a great job. He's a very sweet man, but he does keep his. He's very patient, but he's also very, he's very insistent. Like, use common sense. Just do the. He's very patient with how I put this. This is actually how I'm with my kids. Kind of like, I'm very patient when they make mistakes. I'm not very patient when they deliberately do things they know they're not supposed to do. So Peter is incredibly patient and gracious when you make mistakes that you didn't realize you were making, or you didn't know better than to do them. But when he knows that that you're not supposed to do something and you do it, that's when it starts to get his. That's when he starts to lose his patience with people. But he's very compassionate and very gracious, and he's a good leader. I think he's very knowledgeable. That's another strong. Really one of his strengths, I think, compared to a lot of bishops in this country, is that Peter really, really understands the tradition at a depth that I think very few American bishops can rival. He just really, because he was a historian. He has a research master's in history, which is that's very close in terms of rigor to what a PhD looks like here in the U.S. So even though he doesn't have a PhD, to the best of my knowledge, his research master's from the UK is very close to what a PhD rigor would be like over here. So he's very knowledgeable. He knows his stuff. He knows the English church history and the American English church history. And he's very, he knows what he's talking about. And so it's very nice when you can go to your bishop and ask a question and have a lot of confidence that when he's answering you, he's not just making things up or being revisionist or just pulling stuff out of his hat, but he really knows what he's talking about. It really is helpful. So that's another big strength, is that when he says we're Old High Church, he knows really what Old High Church is, as opposed to what some people think it is. And so it's very refreshing. I'm very grateful for Peter, Bishop Peter. He's a very, very godly man, very knowledgeable man, very patient man. And he keeps to himself, but that doesn't mean, but he cares. He cares very deeply. He's just very private. And so you kind of just have to get used to his unique manner when you're working with him. But once you understand the way he operates, he's a very pleasant person to work with.
Yeah, I remember my first interaction, other than looking at the website, was I just sent a contact of like, hey, I'm interested in the UECNA and like what it's all about. And of all people, he was the one to respond. And he was the first one I had a phone call with. And shortly after, it was you. And it was one of those, like, I didn't know, like, because I was just kind of blindly scrolling through X, formerly known as Twitter, that day. And I was just like, oh, who's this Christian guy? And then there's other guys like Andrew and whatnot. I realized like everybody was kind of in their own like group there. But it was unique having him be the first one to just tell me what the UECNA is, who we are, why we do things and stuff like that. And just like him talking to you, kind of like, again, back to like the white pillar like thing I said earlier, is like he's not that. Like, yeah, he's incredibly busy and he has a lot of things going on in his life. So sometimes like he's not super active in getting back to you like it's like within 2 seconds or anything like that. But eventually,
sometimes you have to be patient with his responsiveness. Yeah, but when he does get back to you, he makes sure he handles what it is you needed to be talking about.
Yeah, like for a while in our chat, it was just the running joke of me and him were talking kind of almost on a daily basis, but he still hadn't friended me on Facebook, and it's like one of these days I'll get in and I'll officially be one of the boys when the Archbishop friends me on Facebook. But yeah, he and when he explains things too, he's very down to earth. He, as you're saying, like he knows his stuff really well, and not only that, he also gives you things to read. It's like, oh, you want to know more about polity? Here's a book. Yep. And he's even so generous to it. Like he'll even send you the PDFs. Like, here's the books to read. Get back to me on it. Let's have a talk, or let's discuss it. Let's get you familiar and get you to understand what these things are, so you can be in the right direction. It's like, great teachers who can do stuff like that are somebody worthwhile to hang around with. And I, just from knowing him for only a couple of short months, just knowing that that's going to be a case almost 100% of the time. Again, not counting when he gets busy and just doesn't get back to you right away. It's like he's someone to rely on, and that's like, wow, like what a brilliant thing there. I had another question when I was going.
Well, what I'll say while you think about that is the one thing I forgot to say about Bishop is that because he's been through the meat grinder, dealing with, you devote so much time, you go through the studies, you work with people, you work towards getting ordained, you want to serve the church, and then for some reason something goes wrong, and then you can't get ordained like you were expected, and you have to kind of like start over again somewhere else. He's been through all that, so he knows what that's like. A lot of the guys who end up calling me interested in the UEC are also guys who, interestingly, have kind of gone through some very choppy waters in the process of going from that call in their heart to serve the church to getting there. They've and a lot of them, having vetted them, I'm like, okay, this does not look like it was so much a you problem. You look like you were just being a normal human being, and these things happen. It's like you didn't sabotage yourself or anything. You weren't completely lacking common sense. It's interesting how frequent this is. Like, how many of these guys really get derailed because of just the most ridiculous things or people. And so one of the strengths of Peter is that because he understands this, he's extremely accommodating and hospitable to people who are coming from these kind of shipwrecked background. I say shipwrecked, but like these backgrounds of, you thought you were on your way, you thought you were going to serve the church, or you believed that was the right, you did everything you thought you were supposed to do, and it didn't pan out for any number of reasons. And he's very willing to hear, as I'm sure you have a lot to share on this. He's willing to hear your story. He's willing to say, you know what, I understand, and let's continue this conversation, and let's get you started and working towards this with us. He's very happy to do that, and he's very accommodating to say, yeah, I'm not going to make you go and go through 3 years of private seminary and go $100,000 into debt to become a minister of the church, where you're going to probably be bivocational anyway for at least a good number of years, where you're probably not receiving much in the way of compensation for your labor monetarily. So he gets it, and he's not going to make you. This kind of goes back to that whole not being beholden to the calcified bureaucracy. Is like, at the end of the day, he's the one who decides for people in his diocese, and likewise the bishops in theirs. Ultimately, they're the ones that decide who's suitable for ordination and who's not. And I'd say the basic prerequisite that we generally look for is a college degree, like a basic bachelor's. But even that can be worked with through Latimer. We have a Bachelor of Divinity program. So, like, there are things that internally you don't have to. You can get it with us, is what I'm saying. Like, we can give you the bachelor's that you need to be able to qualify for ministry. So it's, we work with people with where they're at, and that's largely because of Peter's leadership. That's the big contribution Peter's leadership has made to our jurisdiction of getting the Latimer Institute off the ground, the focus on ministerial formation and providing a extremely cost-effective, if not practically free, means of educating and training ministers to take on these mantles and not have to bankrupt their families in order to serve the church.
Yeah, that wasn't the question I was thinking of. I remembered that one, but it's like I was going to ask that, but you already seemed to fairly answer it already. Of just, like the Latimer Theological Institute, the one I'm going through right now, and the one you've gone through as well.
I've taken a good number of courses through it.
Yeah, just knowing it's like, that to me was a big plus coming in, because that was one of his things that he was saying. It's like, all right, well, if you're gonna want to go into the ministry, then you're gonna have to know what we teach. So we're gonna help you go through like, for me, I'm going through a certificate of Anglican studies is to get me familiar with a lot of the of what we believe, knowing that it is something where it is cheap. He teaches the class, and again, you're with that people that you already know, taking these courses with you. They're learning alongside you, and he, like I said, he just takes things down to earth. He keeps it cost effective, and he gives you not only the knowledge but the tools as well to say, this is the information that you're going to need. It's not like really theory kind of style learning, or like this interpretation or this interpretation. He just straight up tells you, this is what you believe, this is what you're going to tell others to believe, and you're going to go off and do it, and here's the tools to do it. Go. And that to me is just so effective compared to a lot of other schools where, again, like, you will read 5 or 6 other books from 5 or 6 other authors and their opinions, and finding yourself going, well, this is what this person holds, this is what this person holds, but it's up to you to figure out like what you believe and what you think is the better of these answers, and going from there, and leaving people in this weird theological conclusion. Having that conciseness in our seminary is, like I said, it's brilliant. It's something I wish a lot of other schools would do as well. The question I forgot, but now I remembered now, is you kind of briefly mentioned, it's like he knows his stuff about old church and what that is. But I kind of want to test you a little bit as well, because some people do have that confusion where they hear the word Anglo-Catholic and the word Old High Church, and a lot of the time they're like, well, what's the difference of this? So what is the difference between those two, and why do we call ourselves Old High Church?
Sure. So I've kind of made a joke before when someone asked, like, what's the difference between Old High Church and Anglo-Catholic? And I said, well, the biggest difference is it's Old High Church is basically Anglo-Catholic aesthetics matched with Protestant confessional doctrine. And that's very loose, a loose throw, but it does generally ring true. The Old High Church was there was ceremonial. I mean, there is. I will say is, because it's not like the Old High Church tradition has gone away. Old High Church has an emphasis on reverent ceremonial. So there is ceremonial, but it's almost like we focus on, we do maybe not so much as the problem with Anglo-Catholics, the Anglo-Catholic tradition in this, at least in the U.S., is that it almost seems to fall regularly into the kitsch stereotype. Like it's overdone a lot of times. I have no objection to Anglo-Catholic aesthetics in a general sense. I mean, I have no problem with chasubles. I have no problem with a lot of the things they like, incense and so on. There's no issues with me there, and we use it time to time. The issue is, like, you almost go, when you go overboard and you do too much, it begins to get a little bit, it cheapens it. That's kind of idea of kitsch, is just it gets cheapened by being overdone. And so Old High Church still has an aesthetic impetus and focus, but it's a little more subdued. So it's by all means not puritanical. It's quite contrary to any puritanical sensibilities on aesthetics, but it's also subdued, I think, is the way I'd say it. It's high. It's a focus on beauty and aesthetics, but it's not going to be so, if I can say, gaudy and in your face. A lot of the times there's going to be color, but maybe not, as much color as you'll find in an Anglo-Catholic environment. There's going to be ceremonial, but perhaps not as much ceremonial as you're going to find in an Anglo-Catholic environment, where they're almost doing manual acts almost every second of the service. And again, I'm painting with broad brushes. I'm not saying any of this in any intention whatsoever to throw any shade in the Anglo-Catholic direction. I have no beef with them on a personal level at all. But that's the difference, is like, yes, I do manual acts in my service. I'm going to be signing the cross at different points of the service. I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be bowing at the name of Jesus. And there's certain things we do, right? But there's also, like, there's again, that sensible, in a sense, also catering it to the environment, saying, like, yeah, I'm in a little, I'm working in a youth building. I'm not going to go all out I'm not going to go 100 miles per hour, so to speak, in terms of the liturgical aesthetics and all the things that go with it. I'm not going to really wear a chasuble. I'm not because I have an issue with the chasuble, but I'm going to wear a surplice and I'm going to wear a stole because it matches in the environment better. So things like that. But anyway, that's the aesthetic side of it. That's like aesthetics and manual acts and all that sort of stuff. So we have it. We maybe just don't go as overboard with it as some Anglo-Catholics. Not all Anglo-Catholics do this, by the way, but as many of them do, as it kind of stereotypically gets done. And then from a doctrinal perspective, a very strong commitment to the 16th century formularies, a strong commitment to, the Old High Church is very strongly associated with the Laudian Church and the Caroline Divines, right? So this is the era where it kind of comes to a maturity, but it's rooted in the 16th century theology. It's just a mature form of that, as the puritanical impetus becomes more distinguished and sort of branches off from the Church of England itself. The Caroline Divines and the Laudian, impetus, it kind of maintains the course within the English church history. And that's largely the predecessor of the Old High Church sensibility, but they were all Protestants. That's the thing a lot of people don't often get when they talk about Archbishop William Laud and they don't talk about other Caroline divines, is that they were all very Protestant. They may not have been, what some people like to think of as, by their definition of the term today, they may not have been as Reformed Protestant as some people would like. But they were still very Protestant, and they were very apostolic 16th century humanist Protestant. And that was what shaped the Old High Church movement and how things proceeded after. And so, the 17th century, you have a lot of mix-ups. Obviously, you have the revolutions, you have the Civil War, you have, the church being buffeted by all number of different things. But when it all comes out in the wash, you kind of get this subdued high churchmanship that carries the Church of England and the church in America from that point on until really the 20th century. It was the normative expression of Anglicanism. So really, when you talk about old high churchmanship, you're largely talking about the church, the Anglican church tradition as it was most broadly experienced pre-20th century, before the ritualist movement really took hold. You have the Oxford movement, you have the Tractarians, and I don't have any particular beef with them either. I think there was a lot of good things they did. But over the course of that time, that didn't just take over by storm overnight. It took decades for a lot of that stuff to begin to percolate in, and even then to percolate from the UK over to the US. And so in the US, the old high church expression really was the predominant expression until you get to the percolation of the Tractarian Oxford movement over into the US, and then the ritualist movement, which came thereafter. That was really what began to shift the shape of things very differently, as I understand it. So yeah, that's kind of the old high church traditions. We're big on the aesthetics. We love the aesthetics. I have no problem with this reverent, apostolic, worshipful space, beautiful things, reasonable manual acts and other such, all fine and good. But we still maintain a very robust and, I dare say, obstinate Protestant confessional orthodoxy. So the Old High Church is really a great fit for people who've been, say, in a Protestant tradition, like they've been, I think, especially if they're coming from a Reformed Protestant tradition, because they are, they have these senses oh, something's not right. Church should be more beautiful. It should be more reverent. It should be more worshipful. But every time I look over there and I see that, there's all this theology I don't agree with annexed to it. And the beautiful thing about being an old high church Anglican is you can say, yeah, you can have both. You can have your doctrinal commitments. You can be Protestant. You don't have to bend the knee to trying to do historical revisionism and go back to pre-Tridentine, medieval Latin church mindset on things. You can be a Protestant and you can have your nice things. You can have a beautiful reverent service. You can have beautiful vestments. You can have all these things. There's nothing inherently wrong with those things. So you can do both. It's perfectly fine. You don't have to, compromise on your convictions in order to do it. So that is, I think, the great benefit. Now, some Lutherans probably won't have as much of a problem there because that's kind of, Old High Church is kind of like what you get with Lutherans. I think it's very close. You go to a lot of Lutherans, they have many Lutherans, obviously not all these days because the contemporary movement is continuing to gain traction with the Lutheran community. But among many traditional Lutherans, you have beautiful worship spaces, a very high mass setting. You have chasubles, you have all this stuff. But if it's a good Lutheran, you're going to get a Christocentric, gospel-centered doctrine and sermon in that worship. It's unambiguous and unapologetic. So I think it's very close. It's very similar to traditional Lutheranism, just with more of a less Lutheran doctrinal, less Lutheran doctrinal distinctives in it, and having those Anglican distinctives instead. But very close. So that's why we had a guy who was Lutheran and came over and became an Anglican priest. And he's like, yeah, I feel perfectly at home here because this is just the way I always did things. And the doctrine is pretty much he says, for all I care, it's pretty close. It's close enough for me to be happy. So we have Lutherans come over and they're perfectly content. We have Reformed people who are kind of trying to get rid of that puritanical itch and find something more rooted in the apostolic tradition, but not, completely throw away the baby with the bathwater. So that's kind of the two sides of it that we see a lot of.
Nice. So what would be, and we'll start wrapping up here in a little bit. So what would be, so for us, because we're unique, we have our uniqueness that makes us stand out between groups like the ACNA or REC, APA, ACC, and even the broader mainline Episcopal Church. What, and you can separate these out how you like, what would be a thing that we don't like necessarily join them per se, but like have communion with them or work with them? What would have to be a thing for that to happen? And could you ever see that happening in the future?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, we already have intercommunion with almost all the other continuing Anglican jurisdictions, as I recall. Okay. I'd have to double check on that, but I'm pretty sure we already have intercommunion agreements. The UEC has one primary thing that we're not willing to budge on as it pertains to intercommunion, and that's women's ordination. So if the jurisdiction ordains women, we're not doing intercommunion with them because that's equivalent to us saying that it's an acceptable expression of the church, and we hold very strongly that it's not. And as you know, not to disparage anybody, not to be curmudgeonly. It's just that we hold a very strong conviction about this is not as God intended, and so we don't yoke ourselves with other churches that do that. So for the ACNA, the only way we would ever have intercommunion with the ACNA is if they did have a referendum that ultimately did away with women's ordination and retired it. But as for the other continuing jurisdictions, I mean, like I said, I think we already have intercommunion with most of them. And generally, we've always been amenable. Anytime we've been approached by a continuing Anglican jurisdiction that desires intercommunion, we've never had any problem pursuing that with them. So even though I would say, a lot of these people don't really even share our doctrinal or theological commitments, we're still willing to say, you're brothers and sisters in Christ, and we're happy to have intercommunion with you. We still share the same tradition, even if we might think that you're not doing it right. Like I'm being off the cut. I'm being irreverent here, but the point is it's like, we don't have to agree on everything to be friends. We can still be friends and kind of keep each other at a healthy arm's length, but still be in the same, bigger house, if you will. That's fine with us. At least the best of what I've seen with what our bishops have been willing to do and work out. So I think I don't think there's any issue or obstruction in that. I don't foresee us merging institutionally, organizationally with any of the other continuing bodies, at least not merging into them, mainly just because no other there really aren't any other, to the best of my knowledge, there was maybe one that is defunct at this point. There really aren't any other continuing Anglican bodies that I'm aware of that are distinctly Protestant and confessional. So there's not really anything there beyond that I would see us having a merger in that sense. But I'm also not opposed to it if there would be. My objective is to say, hey, get all the confessional Protestants that want to do like that, confessional, sensible Protestantism that's rooted in the apostolic tradition, the apostolic episcopate, willing to be tolerant of each other in terms of, hey, we agree on 95% of stuff according to our 16th century confessions, probably more than 95%, more like 98%. So we can agree to live and let live on that 2% and not get in each other's business about it. I'm fine with that personally, but yeah, I guess I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I properly answered your question, but that's a lot of that's already there, is what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
for those that were eligible, it's already done, and for those who are ineligible, there's really not much to talk about until that changes. So, but we do have intercommunion with the other continuing churches, and we're always willing to entertain intercommunion requests from people who are not just Anglicans. We've talked with Lutherans and Reformed bodies about it as well, in as much as they're willing to talk with us and they're not ordaining women.
Yeah.
We're very open to those conversations. I think there's a pot. Well, I don't want to speak out of turn. There's some conversations I've had with some people that indicate that we might have a new, potentially an intercommunion agreement with a Protestant body from another tradition in the near. We might be opening up those channels here very shortly and pursuing it because there's been an expressed interest. So we might very well have a new one on the table soon. But
could you elaborate on that at all, or is that kind of top secret?
It's not top secret. I just don't know if it's gone beyond just casual conversation, if it's gone to an official level. So I just don't want to speak out of turn because I don't want to, I don't know where it's at. And I haven't gotten an update on it. I just know that we've had unofficial overtures from people, from ministers in another jurisdiction of another Protestant tradition that is Orthodox and, meets all of our criteria, that they're interested in some sort of an intercommunion. They'd be interested to open up the channel for a discussion on intercommunion agreements. So that's what I know. And that's the extent of what I know. I'm just not going to name names because I don't want to cause any trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess this is more of kind of a personal question as well. So like with that idea of like us not merging with groups of the continuum as well. Like if I were to speak to you either as if I was somebody in those communion groups or somebody looking outside as well, I would say it's like, so what keeps us from just full blow, either going into them or we taking them in or merging together as this one like hybrid deal? Like, so what's stopping that?
I want to preface this by saying I'm simply giving my opinion. I'm not speaking in an official capacity because the only people who really have the official capacity to speak on this are the bishops. But what I know is history. And when you look at so you have to talk a little bit about the history of the continuum. The continuum started in the 70s because of the beginnings of women's ordination in the Episcopal Church, along with some an impetus for liturgical reforms that were not well received at all, which ultimately culminated in the 1979 prayer book of the Episcopal Church. So all these churches and clerics who left the Episcopal Church because of these shenanigans that were going on in the 70s all went together with you have the Congress of St. Louis, and you have the Affirmation of St. Louis, and you have all that. There's that history there if people want to go look into it. But basically, they formed their own jurisdiction, separating from the Episcopal Church and calling themselves the Anglicans, who are continuing. That is to say, continuing the tradition, continuing orthodoxy, because the Episcopal Church at that time they had judged to have departed from the scope of orthodoxy in the apostolic tradition. And so the continuing church was originally named the Anglican Church of North America. So this is the original ACNA. Now, shortly thereafter, it renamed itself the Anglican Catholic Church. And this was the beginning of the woes, if you will, because it symbolized the problem with the continuum from its inception is that it had a majority, at least in terms of leadership and the people who were in control of the reins, it had a majority impetus towards a very Anglo-Catholic direction, which in and of itself was maybe not so problematic, but it was Anglo-Catholic to the point that it was marginalizing Protestant broad church sensibilities. And so the UEC was the first to break away from the now ACC because this was indicative of what the direction they were going. They were re-identifying as the Anglican Catholic Church. They were pushing a very strong Anglo-Catholic direction. And the Protestant Episcopalians who ended up in the original ACNA did not agree with that direction, nor did they feel that they were going to have any significant say in the direction that body was going to go in moving forward. So the UEC broke away from the ACC when it made that shift because of this issue, and to preserve a more broad church Protestant Anglicanism. And that has been largely what the UEC has been about ever since. Now, there was a short period of time under one of our archbishops where there was like a lot more friendliness towards Anglo-Catholicism, and we got a lot of Anglo-Catholic guys who came in during that time, but have since pretty much all left. And so all that to say, that was the history lesson shortly, just to give the context here. The problem I would see of trying to come up with some sort of meaningful organizational reuniting with the Anglo-Catholic bodies of the continuum is that I don't think it would be able to, I don't think it addresses the very issues that caused the division in the first place. So I think it would be equivalent to setting ourselves up just to, like, what's the point of rejoining if it's probably going to result in us eventually breaking away again in the near future? But and I do say this also is that the Anglican continuum in the U.S. broadly, but I think Anglicanism in general in the U.S. has a particular challenge, and that's that we have a bit of a I don't know how to best say this. There are a lot of men who end up in Episcopal office who probably ought not have ended up in Episcopal office, and I suppose that's the most I can really say. And that's across the board. That's not. I'm not speaking of any specific jurisdiction. I'm speaking across the board in this country, which is, it's a foregone conclusion because, of course, the continuum happened because of this very issue. We've had this issue going on in this country for a while. That there's a lot of men that, through whatever reasons, and I have suspicions as to those reasons, and perhaps reform ideas as to how to avoid that. But a lot of men have ended up in the purple who probably ought not have ended up in the purple. And the result is that the church suffers. And I think that that's something that you really can't get over. And as long as certain men are in positions of leadership and they have a mentality that things are going to go their way or the highway, and they're not willing to reasonably work with other people, that it's very likely you're just going to end up with, it's like the tyranny of Rehoboam, Solomon's son. You know, it's inevitable that people are going to get pushed too far and they're going to say no more. And they're just going to break away again. So I think that's my gut take on it. I'm not saying, and there are many very good bishops. I just have to clarify here, like, there are many good, wise, loving men who are in the Episcopal office in this country. But I also think those men would very much agree with what I just said, that there's a lot of men who probably shouldn't be. There's a lot of people who've dealt with ecclesiastical politics who can be who would very quickly be able to say, yeah, that's kind of probably the case. We have a problem there, and as long as that's a problem, it poses challenges to unity. And I mean, that goes back to the history of the church. I mean, you look at what happened with the Great Schism of 1054 and all the other schisms that have happened ever in the church's history, and the challenges with intercommunion, ecumenical dialogue, and all these things have always kind of come down to, there's men who end up in positions where they're not necessarily bad men. They're still Christian men. They're not bad men, but they're men who are perhaps led far too much by their natural impulses and not enough by their spiritual impulses when it comes to matters of import. You know, that's where we end up with problems. So but that's also why you should pray for your bishops. You know, every bishop needs to be prayed for all the time for this very reason, because it can happen to any of them. It can happen to any priest too. We're all human, and we're all likely to make these mistakes and fall into these bad patterns. And it's something about being in positions of authority and leadership, especially in a tradition which tends to, and rightly so, pay reverence to those men in that office. It has a tendency for, I think, in the American culture, this probably is more an American culture specifically compared to other parts of the world. But we just, because we have authority issues in general, we also, when we end up in positions of authority, we have a tendency to be not so gracious about our authority. I think that's a kind of an American thing. Because we buck against authority all our life until we're in the position of authority, and now we feel like we gotta, smash heads together to enforce compliance because everyone wants to buck authority, even when they're not. And it can lead to people being overly sensitive. So anyway, these are just some musings. Point is that I think that's the issue, is that the Anglo-Catholic jurisdictions are very Anglo-Catholic, and I don't think that's going to shift. And I have no desire to see that shift on their behalf. I mean, that's who they are, and that's what they want to be, and I'm not looking to call them to change. But we're not going to change either. And as long as we're both going the directions we're going, I don't think it's a good idea to try to force us to live under the same roof, so to speak. We can live next door, we can be next door neighbors, but living under the same roof would probably result in contempt and eventually the house burning down. And I'd rather not see that.
Yeah. The way of peace is truly the way to go. And yeah, like that's a question like I've already have had asked by some people, and it was one of those like getting a better answer to that. It's like, why don't you just merge with these guys? They're bigger, like I know the ACC and another Anglo Continuum group, they like just recently had a merge and everything. So it's like, why, like, what's the holdup? Why are you guys not doing this? Why are they not, like what's happening here? It's like, well, we're different is like, for me, the best conscious way I could put it. It's like, I don't know enough about it, but I just know we're different enough where if we are to peacefully spread the gospel, as you were kind of saying, next door neighbors, it's like sometimes it's best not to take the two units, so to speak, in the military, put them together and act like they're just gonna just synchronize perfectly.
Yeah, we're probably more likely to merge with other Protestant jurisdictions that aren't Anglican, to be honest. Mm-hmm. We're more likely to have other Protestants, non-Anglican Protestants, want to merge with us and us merge with them than merge with other Anglicans at this point. And the reason it's funny. It's funny because we Anglicans I'll hold that idea.
Yeah. And as you were saying, it's like it's not a matter because I say Muppet pop it.
This is it. So with size, right? This is the issue, because people do say like, okay, why are you not more merging with other groups to become more like big, right? And this kind of is a very American mindset that numbers equal legitimacy, or that numbers equal good. Numbers are not always good. Big is not always good. I mean, like, look at your mega churches, right? This is a very, I'm being very flippant here, but like, look at a mega church. I think most confessional Protestants will generally look at a mega church and say, yeah, just because it's big, just because it has a lot of money and a lot of people, and it has that, a strong cultural sway in its community, does not necessarily make it a good thing. Look at the Roman Catholic Church, and I'm not anti-Roman Catholics. I love my Roman Catholic brothers and sisters, and I pray for their clergy. I pray for the Pope, and for that God works with him in every way possible. I'm not anti-Roman Catholic, although I do think the Roman Church is in error. Like, they're in error. I do think that, but I don't think it means they're not a church. I just think they're a church in error. Anyway, all that to say is there was a lot of people could look at the Roman Catholic Church and very quickly say, well, yeah, just because it's the biggest church the organized church on the planet, and because it's one of the wealthiest organizations, period, on the planet, and has some of the biggest numbers of membership of any organization on the planet, doesn't necessarily make it an inherently good thing. I think there's a lot of American Christians who could look at that and say, yeah, that's not necessarily good, you know? So we know that big and numbers and money do not equal goodness. They just equal big and numbers and money. And big numbers and money can all be used for good or evil, depending upon who's in charge of them. That being said, the reason why we're not really enthusiastic to like go seek to merge with other groups to become a bigger group is because we don't believe our legitimacy as a church stems from our size or from our, our legitimacy as a church doesn't stem from our size or resources. It stems from our apostolic commission. We have we have the apostolic succession. We have bishops in apostolic succession who have commissioned us as ordained ministers in that succession to serve this church and to build the church of Christ. And there is one church, there's one body, one faith, one baptism. And so the administrative unit of our jurisdiction is its legitimacy and its potency are not a function of how much money we have or how many numbers we have or who deigns to give us the time of day. It's, are we doing the kingdom's work or not? And that I think we are doing. It is difficult right now. It's a difficult world in general to do kingdom work in, especially when you don't have big numbers of people and resources and money and clout. It is a difficult world and clout-seeking world that we live in, where everyone's constantly chasing after it, and the clout-seeking behavior is at an all-time high. Yes, it's a very hard world to build the church in where this is the mindset of people. But that doesn't make the word of God any less true or potent or effective. It doesn't make the church any less true or good or potent or effective. So I would rather be small and be able to do things the right way and not be getting brought into, like, what's the point of having beautiful buildings and hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank accounts if you're going the way of heresy and apostasy? Like, what's the point? What, you've lost the forest for the trees at that juncture. So I'd rather live in humility, if I have to. I'd rather live in humility and truth and light than live in, darkness with wealth and clout and, the nicest stuff. It's like, that's not going to avail me much in the long run. It's having a long-term vision. That's where the issue. I think this is kind of the problem in our culture broadly, is no one has vision anymore. Everyone's right here, right now, instant gratification, instant entertainment, instant stimulus. No one has, and I say no, I'm using universal language, but most people seem to be struggling, and this is all generations, by the way, not just young generations. People seem to really be struggling with vision. They struggle with delayed gratification. And as a result, this has caused the church to suffer. And so this is one of the things we need to address as a church. We need to continually batter down on that and not let that become, not let that keep gaining ground in the church itself, because it's not healthy. The whole point of the church is where it's the faith and the hope and the love, the hope looking towards the second coming and the resurrection. The whole point of the church is forward thinking, it's vision. And so if you don't have vision, you've missed the plot of redemptive history. You must have the vision. You must be looking forward at what's yet to come, not what's here right now. So anyway, I certainly don't think it's necessary, especially if it would further encumber us with respect to what we're actually trying to do. I don't think the numbers matter, but I also have the conviction that if we're doing things the right way and we're building from the foundation correctly, that the house will get built, and the house will be a beautiful house that will stand the test of time once it is built, because the foundation will be sure. And I think that says a lot more for what the future for the UECNA is compared to what the future may look like for a lot of other groups in the coming decades. By the time that you and I are old and gray, I think we'll be able to look back and say, we built something that'll last, and there are many, many groups that won't exist anymore because they've completely fallen to the tides of the world. So
yeah, this has been a great conversation. I mean, I've learned a lot, especially like even just being in the organization, still just learning a lot, and just having what we stand for, at least just in a dialogue setting like we're doing right now. Just getting to learn more about the UECNA, and kind of the one final question is kind of the name of the title. And we kind of briefly talked about it earlier, but it's like, if you were to be sitting next to or standing with or talking with somebody and you had to say, this is the appeal to the UECNA, you should join today, what's your little sales pitch? And again, we kind of already said it, but just like,
after an hour and a half long conversation extrapolating on all this,
yeah,
now you're asking me to give my elevator pitch.
Yeah.
I'd say come work in a church. Come work to build the church in a organization, an administrative unit, right? But come work in a church to serve the church that is properly masculine. If I'm talking to guys who are interested in serving, are we talking about people broadly? Or are we talking about ordinance, like
people
okay.
Broadly?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that might still work there too. I mean, we are a church, I think, that is characterized as increasingly going to be characterized by genuine masculinity, spiritual, scriptural masculinity. And by that, I don't mean like the faux machismo that we see today, or the neo-patriarchists that are advocating all kinds of weird ideas all the time. Sort of like that baptized Andrew Tate type stuff. If you want a church where men are seeking to be men as God created them to be, and in a way, in operating that way to glorify God through their masculinity in a biblical, scriptural, spirit-filled, spirit-led way, and all the attendant blessings that, should that be done correctly, may bring, the UEC is the church for you. Because that's the church we're seeking to be. If you're looking for a confessional, Protestant, masculine church that is pro-men and women, because it's pro-men. It's by being pro-men, it is very pro-women, but is seeking to restore, at least in the context of North America, right? Restore North American Christian masculinity to what it ought to be. And as a result, restore the church, because I think there's a direct correlation between the decline of manhood in this country, or North America broadly, and the decline of the church. And so a church where men are happy to be a part of, and where they have relationships with other men, and where they're seeking to be godly men who want to lead their families with a sacrificial love, and are seeking to do things the right way, even if they're catching up on a lot of lost time. This is the church for you. So for ladies who are looking for a good husband, or who are married and want their husband to be loved by other men, to be encouraged and discipled and grow in the Lord, so that he can honor her and love her sacrificially, and their kids, and lead their family wisely, this is the church we're seeking to be. This is the church we are, but we're continuing to grow and improve in this area. This is the vision, is a church where men can be godly men, and not a fake masculinity, not a patriarchist masculinity, at least not in the sense that it's presented today, like not a reactionary masculinity to the extremes of feminism, but a traditional, wholesome, biblical, scriptural, steadfast masculinity that has been the character of the church throughout most of its history. So return to that. That's what we're seeking to get back to. And tradition broadly, seeking to be a light and of the historic Christian faith in a world that's continually having fragmented identity crisis, because it doesn't know where it came from or where it's going anymore. We know where we're going because we know where we came from. And by focusing on where we came from, we are charting a course that is steadfast and sure about where we're going. There you go. That's my too long elevator pitch, but I think I got that out in under like 3 minutes. I think it kind of works.
Yeah, that works. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, just having a conversation with me, presenting what the UECNA is, like I said, in this dialogue form. Would you want to end us with a prayer, Father Christian?
Sure. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for your church. We give you thanks for the UECNA specifically. We ask that you would keep her, bless her, beautify her, sustain her, provide her in all things, draw all your people who you would have be part of her to be part of her. Ask that you would bless us with the pastoral capabilities to love and cherish and serve each and every soul that comes through our doors. That you would continue to raise up a generation of young men who would serve your church sacrificially as priests and as deacons and perhaps one day as bishops. And that you would also guide and keep our bishops in the way of truth, the path of holiness, and the humility of life, both now and forevermore. Bless us and keep us, O Lord, and let us serve you with our whole heart. And we ask all this in Jesus' name, with you and the Holy Ghost, one God, world without end. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, thank you all for watching, and thank you, Father Christian, for coming on. And I hope everybody here has a blessed day.
Bless y'all. Take care.